The second thing that he did is, I think that he's radically changing the philosophical, just as he did in the domestic sphere, this philosophical approach to foreign affairs. It resembles more the promise of the European Enlightenment of the 18th century, what Kant had said, or Rousseau, or Montesquieu, not so much Montesquieu, but other French thinkers, that wars take place because of misunderstandings, miscommunications, economic pressures, the underclass. They're not in the classically tragic view, Hobbesian, Thucydidean view. They don't break out because one side wants something it shouldn't get and believes it can't get it by going to war. Pretty good chance of making a profit out of it, whether psychological, economic, and the wars start for irrational things like, as Thucydides said, honor and pride and self-interest. No, he doesn't believe that, and therefore he doesn't believe that the classical ways that you prevent wars, military preparedness, balance of power, alliance, deterrence, even, God forbid, on some occasions, preemption, there's a new approach. So the first interview Mr. Obama gave was quite revealing. He gave it to the Al Arabia, Dubai-based, Saudi-funded newspaper. He said four quite astonishing things, I think. One, that he wanted to reverse America's role in the Middle East and get back to the good days 20 or 30 years ago. I was stunned when I read that. When I think of 20 or 30 years ago, I think the Lebanon War, I think of CIA agents hung up, I think of serial terrorism against American embassies, I think of the assassination of Anwar Sadat. I don't think it was that good. Second thing he said, which I thought was quite stunning, is he wanted to talk to Iran about diplomatic matters without preconditions, and so there were no misunderstandings. But I don't think anybody in this room has any misunderstandings. You just have to Google Iran, and you say Iran quotation marks plus nuke, and all of a sudden you'll get 1 million hits, and there'll be left-wing hits, right-wing hits, moderate hits, but they will tell you that Iran pretty much wants to get a bomb. And why do they want to get a bomb? You would too if you were Iran, because it will all of a sudden empower the Persian Shia in a way that the Arab Sunnis cannot imagine. It will be a regional player. It will be able to dictate situations as diverse as the West Bank or the amount of oil that's produced out of it. It's a wonderful thing for the Iranian, and it's worth the risk, especially if you think there's no consequences entailed in now, especially. So he said that he wanted to talk to Iran. I thought that was quite unusual, because Reagan talked with Iran, Bush Sr. talked with Iran, Bill Clinton talked with Iran. Usually when you talk to Iran, you brag that you're talking to Iran, and then pretty much down the course of the negotiation, an Iranian member of parliament or an Iranian official says you're a fool for doing so, and starts to ridicule you. We're already seeing the reactions to that often. Third thing he said was that he wanted to readdress our role in the Muslim world. Just a minute, what does that mean? We're very unpopular in the Muslim world, he said in the speech. But I was looking after the speech at the Pew Global Attitudes, and where we are unpopular in two countries, Pakistan and Palestine, the approval rating for bin Laden in particular and suicide bombing in general has just fallen dramatically from the high 60s and 70s down to 34%. Bin Laden is not popular now in the Middle East. He was right after 2001. And suicide bombing is not. Now, George Bush isn't either, but there may be a connection that he's not popular because he brings ruin in his wake, and he brings on the retaliatory ability of the United States to act should he do the things that he had been doing in the 90s. So he's not popular. It's sort of like, don't be around us, bin Laden. Every time you come around us, people get mad and bad things happen. He also said he wanted to restore the reputation of the United States, but with Muslims. And then I thought I was baffled. I'm not trying to be overdramatic or theatrical. He said, you know, from the fact that I'm from a Muslim family and my father was Muslim, I said, wait.
Yeah.
That was a taboo subject in the campaign. To raise that, to invoke it, even for legitimate discussion, you didn't have to be a right-wing demagogue, although many did. It was out of bounds. It was illiberal to suggest that. Now suddenly he says, what's illiberal at home is of advantage abroad, because I can connect with people who, by the basis of my middle name, will think that I'm more sensitive to their concerns. So what did he say? He said, we have to address the treatment of Muslims in the world. Wait. If he wants to address the treatment of Muslims, talk to the Russians. They went into Grozny in the 90s and they flattened it. They killed 40,000. They sent Scud missiles into downtown Grozny. They killed over 80,000 Chechens. If you were really worried about Muslims in the world, talk to the Kuwaitis. After we evicted Saddam Hussein, they deported 350,000 Palestinians. Just put them on boats and planes and sent them back to the West Bank. If you want to talk about Muslims, talk to the Chinese that are forbidding Muslims within their own territorial borders to even say the prayers from a public minaret. Don't talk to the United States. Why do I say don't talk to the United States? Because we fed Muslims in Somalia. We bombed a Christian European country into smithereens in Belgrade to save Muslims, which no Muslim country and no European country could do. We were the ones who criticized the Chechen problem and the way that Russia handled it, not the European. We have the most liberal immigration policy toward Islamic countries of any in the world. You can come from any Muslim country and establish a mosque in Malibu. Try that in Saudi Arabia, it's just impossible. Or Pakistan, if you tried that with a Christian church. The United States gives, according to the original Camp David protocols, pretty much the same as Israel, and it's balanced by Jordan and Palestine and Egypt. So I think that interview was pretty much the template of what to expect. And the biggest change, I don't want to get into all the change, but remember what happened in the first 5 weeks. Dr. Khan in Pakistan, who had been under house arrest, was mysteriously let go. Our base that were in the former Soviet republics were mysteriously, that we used to supply Afghanistan, were mysteriously shut down. And the Russians mysteriously said to us, very embarrassing I think, that we had offered them a quid pro quo. We'll sell out the Poles and the Czechs on missile defense. You work with the Iranians and stop supplying with fishable. They said, no haggling. That's haggling. That's not called soft power or diplomacy or listening or multilateral being like in this dog-eat-dog arena that we call the United Nations of the world. That's called haggling, unfortunately. I wish it weren't so. I wish that this view of the Enlightenment was true, but it doesn't seem to be, unfortunately. But the biggest change, I think, will be in the Middle East. We've seen John Kerry go to Syria and offer, pretty much without preconditions, a new relationship, even though Syria is trying to destroy Lebanon. It had occupied it. It was building a nuclear facility. We are seeing some appointments I think should raise eyebrows, not just Samantha Power, but people like Charles Freeman, who's on record with pretty much some very anti-Semitic things he said, as well as some crass and gratuitously mean things he said about the Tiananmen Square protesters. He's going to be the head of the National Intelligence Committees, the cohesive group that ties in all intelligence. We're giving $1 billion to Hamas. I don't know why that is. We don't know. I shouldn't say to Hamas, to Hamas-controlled Gaza. Some of us thought that that war may have been started because Gaza decided to shoot over 6,000 rockets into Israel, but that doesn't matter. We're starting to see then a all-encompassing, radically new view, I think, of the Middle East, and it goes something like this. The Arab and Muslim world has changed radically since 1967. Yes, there was a war in 1967 over 1948 Israel. And there had been a war in 1948 and 1956 and 1967 when Israel was in its original borders. But those are over with now. So if Israel will just go back to 1967 borders, get out completely the West Bank, then you will see the sort of stability you've seen when they've withdrawn from Gaza and Lebanon. Go back, because the Arab world and the Muslim world has changed, they're more reasonable, so you're going to go back into 67 Israel, and the world is going to calm down. There will be no longer any material grievance against you because you've given the territory back, and this neocon idea that people are irrational or they're nursed by fear or pride or insecurities or their grievances can be perceived or unreal doesn't matter. That's out. It's logic, enlightenment. You're back in 67. I know there were wars when you were back. I know there were wars to destroy you, but that was before the Muslim and Arab world surrounding Israel had evolved into a higher plane of thought. That's pretty much, I think, what we're seeing in foreign policy